Good morning, everyone. I'm David Newman from MIT and the director of the MIT Portugal Program, the MIT side. We're very happy to be here today. It's wonderful to be in Coimbra. We're just waiting for the technical system to boot up because I guess we've lost this projector. But that gives me a time to welcome all the students. Thank you so much for being here. We really look forward to your posters and your presentations, and for all the faculty colleagues in the audience. It's, again, our great pleasure to have a large MIT team here. This is a day of celebration when we get to reflect on some of the past work, and it's also a day to look forward to the future with the most of us that have been assembled to kind of launch phase 2 and talk strategically about the upcoming research, the upcoming test beds. So you'll see in your programs, we're going to start with an incredible keynote talk. I'll introduce Professor Cooney in 1 second. If you look through the program for the agenda for the day, then after Professor Cooney motivates us, we're going to continue on with some panel discussions, always highlighting some of our incredible work of our students, and then followed by the themes that we're moving along for phase 2 of MIT Portugal, specifically looking at new frontiers, and we'll be looking at regenerative medicine and smart cities, design and manufacturing. So it's really a discussion all afternoon, and we really look forward to people providing input and things that can help us reach the excellence that we desire in our phase 2. So I think we're pretty much ready as soon as I get the thumbs up here. Are you all situated there? So it's my great honor to introduce a colleague, a friend, a mentor. Professor Charles Cooney is from chemical engineering at MIT, but he's a man of many hats. So he's retiring this weekend, but as we discussed last night at the reception, that just means that he'll be down to probably full, 100% work, because right now he works at about 200-300% in terms of being from chemical engineering, also the founding director of our Despande Center. He's been a core MIT faculty member and led our innovation entrepreneurship efforts over the past 7 years. And I think we've all learned a lot and gained from his experience. So even though Professor Cooney is retiring, as I said, he'll always remain an advisor and mentor. And so without further ado, we're looking forward to his talk and exploring new frontiers to really concentrate on translating this research into commercial impact. And there's no one who has probably more experience and better to give this talk than my colleague friend Charlie Cooney. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, as the slides get started, I'm once again delighted to have the opportunity to be in Portugal. I've had the good opportunity to be associated with the MIT Portugal program since its very beginnings. And as a consequence, I've had the chance to watch the program grow. I've had a chance to watch the engagement of the faculty expand. I've had a chance to watch many bright students come through the program and realize that it is the students who benefit from the MIT Portugal program who are going to lead Portugal to a new place to enhance the impact of knowledge, science, and technology. And that's really the excitement. But when I was asked to give this opening talk this morning, the challenge that I was given was to provide some perspective on what is going to be in the future, how we're going to get there. And as I listened to the opening comments in the panel this morning, there was a reoccurring theme from each of the panelists. And that theme was creation of new knowledge, having impact from that knowledge, having benefit to society. And that's really what this program is about, and that's what we're trying to do. Now, it looks like I'm going to do this without slides. Well, what I'm going to try to do today As David mentioned, I will, on July 1st, become Professor Emeritus at MIT after having spent 44 years on the faculty. And during that period of time, I've had many experiences to try to bring together innovation from science and technology, both in my own research as well as during the last 13 years during the creation of the Despondé Innovation Center. And what I have done this morning, and what I will try to do this morning, what I will try to deliver, is to extract from some of those experiences some of the important observations and lessons that I have found to be helpful for me in translating early stage science into impact for society. And it's that journey that I will, I think, eventually take you through. I can do it without slides. I would prefer to do it with slides. Okay, let me take you forward and remind you that as we look at innovation, as we look at taking innovation forward, it's a matter of perspective. And sometimes as you come around the corner on a journey, one encounters a vision of where you want to go. And in this particular picture, that little white peak up on the right-hand side is where I wanted to go. I had read about it. I had looked at the maps. I had prepared myself. I had looked at the photographs, but I had never seen it until this very moment. And all of a sudden, when we see those things that we have planned for, that we have imagined, that we have a mindset about, and we need to wrap our hands and minds around it, all of a sudden, when it's there in front of you, it's bigger and perhaps more treacherous than one first expected. So this perspective, as we move from research in the laboratory to taking it to something that is operational, is a very challenging one. And it's part of this journey that I'll take you through as we think about innovation. Now, the small peak here in the back happens to be Everest, but this is the one that was of interest to us. So as you begin a journey, one needs to have the goal in mind, and I'll come back to this theme as to what is our goal as we think here in the university about innovation and translation of that innovation to impact. Do we have clarity in our goal? And I'll ask you this question, and you'll need to ask yourselves this question many times over. As we began the journey of the MIT Portugal program almost 10 years ago, 8 years ago now, we were motivated to try to build a community around a shared interest across MIT and the universities in Portugal, a shared interest in research, in technology, in innovation, and through entrepreneurship, translating that innovation to impact. And our motivation was to strengthen the Portuguese university programs, as was noted earlier, and to do so realizing that technology is the foundation for innovation, and that is the precursor to economic growth. So our goal was to really be able to create new ventures emerging from MIT technology, from Portuguese technology, and it was really about bringing people together in these programs. And that's what we set off to do. And it's in this retrospective of looking not just at the MIT Portugal program, but other things that I've been involved with that I'll try to extract some answers to these questions. How do we create value to enhance the impact of early stage science and technology? It's not intuitively obvious, and it doesn't happen spontaneously. How do we teach people to be deliberately innovative, to be entrepreneurial in their behavior? And what are the attributes of the innovation ecosystem that is necessary to support these people as we seek to have impact from our ideas? So these are the questions that I think are important for us to try and answer. This is a work in progress. It is not a fait accompli. But this work in progress, let me remind you, goes back many years in Portugal. One of my interests is early stage cartography from the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries. And that drove me to begin to focus on the age of discovery. Oh, okay. So the age of discovery, and it was, if we think back here in Portugal 500 years ago with Prince Henry, in the early 15th century, Prince Henry in modern day times is attributed to the School of Navigation, not a school as we know to it, a place where we go to learn, but rather bringing people together, creating a community that was a collective body of knowledge. And it was in the early 15th century, the 1440s through 1470s, when many Portuguese explorations down the coast of Africa began to develop the modern principles of navigation in the open ocean. And prior to this time, it's important to realize, again, a matter of perspective, prior to this time, knowledge of how to sail the open ocean out of the sight of land and below the equator out of the sight of the North Star was new knowledge. People didn't know how to do it. It wasn't until then 1490 when Bartolome Diaz was able to sail down the west coast of Africa and discover that in fact Africa was not linked to the body of land called Antarctica, but in fact there was an opening and it was possible to circumnavigate Africa. And then it was 1497 when Vasco da Gama successfully did circumnavigate Africa and discovered a new route to India. And then the impact that led through a century of Portuguese domination of trade to India. But the question that coming from this that I found particularly interesting is the following. And that is, based on these early explorations led by Prince Henry and many explorers, why was it that Vasco da Gama in 1497 was able to succeed where Columbus had failed? And there's a lot to be learned, because as one looks at this journey, in fact, and you look at the principles that I'll take you through briefly, it is no different than the journey and the questions and the issues that we practice today. So why is it that Vasco da Gama succeeded where Columbus failed? Now, Columbus's failure did lead to something rather interesting. It happened to be a continent called the North and South America that has turned out to be not such a bad part of the world, but he ran into it by accident. Well, when you step back and you ask about the success of Gama, there are a number of lessons that come out of that. One is there was a convergence of technology in Portugal. Ship technology, design, sales, cartography. And it uniquely happened here because of the geopolitical position of Portugal at that time. It was ocean-facing. In order to develop new routes of trade, there was a necessity to sail in the open ocean. It was a point of convergence. The sailing technology that migrated from the Mediterranean, initially of Arab design, and then influenced by European design. The sail technology that moved its way down from Northern Europe, in particular the Dutch and the English. Cartography that had been developed in a relatively sophisticated form in Central Europe had moved across into Portugal. And it was this convergence of technologies that led to a new style of ship that was suitable for open water navigation. Gama had available the best navigation technology at the time in terms of timekeeping, the astrolabes and the stars, and the ability to use sounding to determine depth. The ships were designed for open water. What had evolved initially was the caravel, a round-bottomed ship, fairly small with a lantern sail. But as long voyages became attractive, that began to emerge into the carrack, a somewhat larger ship, a larger sail, more enclosure, more stability, but much more maneuverability than the early ships that had dominated trade in the Mediterranean. And that need to be able to sail before the wind, to sail with maneuverability, to sail in the estuaries to explore Western Africa, was the hallmark of Portuguese innovation in ship technology from the mid-15th century. And then leadership. A very interesting lesson. Columbus, as we know, had been trying to sell his venture as an entrepreneur for 20 years. And it wasn't until he found Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand in Spain, who were willing to finance this venture, that he was able to embark on his westerly sail in search of India. But in the course of selling his venture, Columbus had bought into the concept that the world was about 15,000 miles around. However, it was known from the days of Ptolemy in the 3rd century AD, that in fact the world was between 22 and 24,000 miles around. But Columbus denied this knowledge because if he, by using the 15,000 mile circumference, he could then guarantee in his business plan, in his venture that he had been trying to sell, that you would hit land in 30 to 40 days, which was the capability of the ships of that time. And it wasn't until Gama developed a smaller ship that was able to handle a 90-day open water voyage. Columbus had a mutiny after 30 days, and Gama was able to do a 90-day open water voyage. Smaller ship, less crew, could carry more food and water. And in addition, because of the Portuguese sailors that had mapped the area, the western coast down to Lagos, and for almost 50 years had been trading gold and silver along this coast, this was well known. And it was Diaz who learned that in order to get around the winds and currents at this particular point off the African coast, you had to sail west before you went east. So the continuous learning of the Portuguese explorers mapping the west coast of Africa, understanding the currents and the winds, and the ability of Gama, who was not an entrepreneur. Gama was brought on as a manager, hired specifically for this journey, was not selling a venture as Columbus did, had not married to ideas that were old, but had an open mind and was able to take that learning, travel west, and then east around the Cape, up to Africa, and then back and up along the coast of Africa in a 3-year journey. So it was these lessons of learning and open innovation, which we think of as a modern concept of innovation today, yet was openly practiced 500 years ago. So there's a lot to be learned by looking back in order that we can be able to look forward. And it's for these reasons that I find a fascination with studying history from this period of discovery. As we set out on these journeys, and as some of you may know, a hobby of mine is high altitude mountaineering. Again, there are many lessons to be learned. And here, as I'm going down the glacier to set out on a 1-month expedition on Denali in Alaska, I'm reminded that you need to know where you want to go and have a means of measuring where you are, or you'll never know that you've arrived. You need to know where you want to go. Your goal has to be clear, and your metrics as to performance, success along that goal need to be clear, or you won't know that you've reached it. Now, part of my interest is in antique maps, of which I'm just going to show you one. This is a map that portrays the world in the early 15th century. And as you look at it very carefully, here you see India. Well, India doesn't quite look like this. Here you see what was called Ceylon and as Sri Lanka. That's not quite where it is. These islands are the Maldives that we know actually happen to be up here. And this large island called Sumatra is actually a collection of islands. So I like old maps for two reasons. One is they're beautiful. They're works of art. They're nicely done. And second, they remind me, the second is that they're wrong. And this to me is humbling, because they aren't wrong because the cartographers drew them wrong. They drew them right as they knew the world at the time. So I look at these maps, and I have many. This is one of my favorites. But I look at these maps, and it reminds me that as I do my own research, I think I'm right. And I am right as I look at my results today. But are those results the same results that will hold steady going forward? And I remember these maps, and the answer is not necessarily. I need to constantly challenge where I'm going, what I'm doing, the assumptions that I've made, and the directions that I want to go. So whenever I'm feeling good about my research, I go back and I look at these maps on the wall in my home, and I'm reminded that at one time these cartographers thought they were right, but in fact they were wrong. And it's the new knowledge that is our responsibility to bring to the table. So as we think about generation of new knowledge, where does it come from? Well, these ideas emerge from the university. And what we're doing is bringing forth it's the evolution of these ideas. And in many cases, we have technology looking for a home. Go back to the opening remarks by the rectors. It's about knowledge, it's about impact. It's about bringing science and technology to society. Can we do that when we take knowledge as these ideas and try to find what we might do with it? And the lesson that we have learned is to take these ideas, to be very careful understanding how we select ideas from the many that emerge. And what I'm interested in is selecting ideas that, if successful, may have commercial impact. To not leave these ideas to spontaneous generation of interesting directions, but rather to bring direction to the table. Because in order to translate an idea into impact, you have to know where you're going and a means of measuring where you are. So how do we provide direction to those ideas? How do we connect the ideas and the investigators to society in order to have commercial impact? Can we then take those ideas, grow them into NUCO companies, and in fact, grow them for economic growth? And this is the experiment we began 12 years ago in the formation of the Deshpande Center. Now, when we take new ideas forward, there's risk. And as I took this picture of my son climbing this face that happens to be at about 7,000 meters altitude, and the distance from his feet to the ground is about 2,000 meters. So the impact, if you slip, is clear. And it's something you don't have any ability to change. So when we think about the risk of a new venture, when we think about a risk of any of the activities in our lives, it's about thinking not of the impact if we fail, but it's how we can manipulate the probability to avoid that failure. And that's what we can do. We can focus on the probability, because I cannot change the risk associated with 2,000 meters of open space with a rock bottom. But I can change the probability so that when you look at the technology, even in something as simple as this, you don't have one rope, you have two. And the gear, in fact, there are three. And you don't leave yourself open to the risk of the downside, but rather you manage the upside. And that's what we're trying to do as we look about managing innovation. So we did this by putting in place an innovation center that if you think of the idea value chain, as you move from the idea to invention to innovation and impact, what we're trying to do is to apply a set of risk mitigation strategies. So the first thing we do here is we use small grants called ignition grants. And this really is about taking risk. We reach out to investigators in the university and we ask, well, what are your good ideas that, if successful, might have commercial impact? And we put a small amount of money into funding those ideas in translational research, knowing full well that most of these ideas are not going to work. Not necessarily fail, but they aren't going to generate a commercially viable idea. Now, I often get the question, well, how can you commit money to a grant to an investigator if it's not going to work? And you know it's not going to work. The problem is I don't know which ones won't work. And if you don't take risk, then you're not going to be able to move forward. So taking risk in a way that is protected is a very exciting and rewarding thing to do. And it's in that next step, when we go to larger grants, where we're really trying to manage the risk. So it's okay to take risk. It's okay to have things not work, but you don't want to do that in a way that has a large downside. So small amounts of money, translational work, proof of concept can go a long way. And this is what we've learned, and I'll share the results of that with you in a moment. And then these larger grants, we don't want to make mistakes. And that's where we now have a higher degree of certainty because we have selected these from the earlier ones. And as they mature, the idea is to then spin this work outside of the university through the porous boundary of between the internal ecosystem of the university and the external ecosystem of commercial development. And it's this movement outside the university that involves connecting people, connecting ideas with markets and with customers. And our goal is to do this within a 2 to 3 year life cycle. And it's the model we call select, direct, connect. Select ideas because they might have impact, direct them to the right customer, the right user, and connect them with the user and connect them with the finance community. And there's clearly a gap between these early stage ideas and commercial reality. So we need to learn how to manage that gap. And we manage it in a way that recognizes the strength of the university. It's about knowledge. It's about education. It's not about developing businesses. And the strength of the marketplace, the strength of industry. It's about taking ideas that have been de-risked, investing in them to bring them into the market. And there's a gap in between. We've learned to fill this gap. We do it by a series of grants. We do it by a program called catalysts or mentors. And these catalysts are individuals like a chemical catalyst, which is meant to accelerate but not enter into the reaction. These mentors are meant to accelerate the translation of technology, but not necessarily enter into it. They work with the investigators, they work with the researchers, trying to bring the ideas across this gap and make them attractive for investment by industry. And we also do it by education. Innovation teams are groups of students, engineering students, business students, brought together in the classroom to learn how to take a technology to impact. Now, this is very different than the way that business education typically will train people to write a business plan around an idea. Because in a business plan, as traditionally taught, one has identified a need in the marketplace, brings together people who can develop a solution to that need, creates a company around it, and has access to whatever technology or science is necessary. We in the university are in a different position. We have the science and technology. We don't necessarily know the need. And how we identify that need, in fact, is a major problem. Now, in this program, we've had some success. We have evaluated over 650 proposals. We've funded 100 projects, funded with $12 million in grants. Out of those 100 projects have come 30 startups. And those 30 startups have now raised $500 million in venture financing. That does not come from MIT. That's outside the porous boundary of the institution. 70 projects, however, were too early. They didn't work. They didn't mature into a project. And at first glance, these represents, I'll use the F word, failure. But are they failures? And I will argue strongly they're not failures, because of the 70 projects, we've had a very large number of people. Every one of the investigators associated with that project has had an entrepreneurial experience, understands what it takes to translate an idea into something that might have entrepreneurial impact. And typically, they come back to us again. So it's not about just identifying the things that are going to be successful. It's about identifying the things that might be successful, nurturing those ventures, educating the investigators within the safe boundaries of the university so that they can come back again and try a second and a third time. And it turns out that this involves a large number of faculty, students, external venture capitalists and entrepreneurs, and creates a large number of jobs. And it's this network that becomes part of the self-sustaining network, the sustainability of this venture ecosystem. Now, as we get down this path of innovation, I took this picture of my son along the summit ridge of Denali. It reminds me that one thoughtful step at a time is important because each decision has its consequences. The wrong decision as you walk along a knife-edge ridge, which is a very beautiful spot to be, you don't get the picture of the wind whipping across the ridge at this moment. But if someone falls left, what's the next decision? Jump right. So you need to get your left and your right in perspective. So the next step is important, but you anticipate a fall left, jump right, and you're roped to somebody, and make sure the rope is tied. So as I have reflected back on these steps down this journey, I've come up with what I feel to be the critical success factors that have to come together if you want to create impact from the university in the commercial marketplace. And there are just six lessons that are embodied here. One is recognizing that ideas emerge from a strong base of basic research, scientific knowledge. And that's what we do well in the university. We are about knowledge. We are about research. We are about learning. And that's the strength of our institution. One does not want to change that. And it's from that scientific knowledge that occasionally these interesting ideas emerge. those ideas need to be recognized in the context of a problem, and that's market knowledge. Because a solution without a problem has no impact. And impact is what innovation is about. Third, that both money, funding, and mentoring are necessary to bridge the gap, to bridge that knowledge gap. We all come to the table, we all come into the room with a disability. And that disability is our prior knowledge. We know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. But we all know something different. So by coming to the table with different people with different skills, we can bridge that knowledge gap in a much more effective way. Fourth, it's about an internal ecosystem. We can't do it alone. We need to stimulate and reward and support the entrepreneur within the boundaries of our internal ecosystem. There has to be an external ecosystem to accept innovation into the marketplace. And lastly, there have to be entrepreneurs willing to take the risk of new ideas and execute on the vision that they present. Now, as I have reflected back, and we did a 10-year retrospective analysis on the Despondé Center, and asked, well, what lessons have we learned? And certainly this idea of understanding what the critical success factors are is one of the important lessons. But when we looked at the data from having selected 100 projects from 600 proposals and asked, did it make a difference? There were two very interesting surprises. There were many things that were obvious and came out of it, but there were two surprises that we did not anticipate that I want to speak to. One is that we had the opportunity to compare licensing of projects that had been supported by the Despondé Center. Now, what that support means is that there were ignition grants, innovation grants, mentoring, focus on go-to-market strategy, connection to the customer, connection to venture financing. We compared those projects with all of the other licensable technology coming out of MIT, which is a large body of licensable technology. And what emerged in rather a rigorous statistical manner, that there's a 44% higher probability of projects that had been funded through this innovation cycle, of those projects being licensed to new ventures. And that we felt was, we hoped that would be the case, and the data support it. The second lesson came out of an examination of the population of people that we were funding as part of these innovation innovation centers. 75% of the applicants were from the School of Engineering, mechanical, material science, and chemical engineering, to a lesser extent, EECS. Now, a large number of electrical engineering and computer science faculty were funded, but it's a very large department. So on a pro rata basis, these were in order of funding of innovation grants, the way that the data played out. About half of the faculty were full professors, and the other half were associate and assistant professors. The interesting aspect about the assistant professors, it turns out that we were concerned that an assistant professor without tenure or associate professor without tenure would take the risk of going down a path of an entrepreneurial activity, because isn't that going to get in the way of tenure and promotion? And it turns out that the way we had structured innovation grants to be identical with any other grant at MIT, so that there were no barriers to publication or support of students or doing the kind of work that a young faculty member would want to do, because it was it was relevant to their promotion and tenure. That in fact we were able to attract younger faculty into these type of innovative and entrepreneurial activities. And that was something that gave us actually quite a good feeling in retrospect, and was a surprise. We didn't know that would happen. Now, I made the comment earlier that when we think about innovation, we must think about the impact that it's going to have. So research for understanding and knowledge, that's what we are about. But innovation does not occur without a demand, without a problem to be solved. And as we have thought about this process of innovation, and how do you actually create that impact? Now, again, during the opening comments, there was a suggestion that the government of Portugal is interested in funding innovation, and I'm not sure that the government of Portugal wants to fund innovation solely for knowledge's sake itself, but rather recognizing that it is a generation of economic impact. But to get there, if you look at the systems dynamics diagram, here we have research in the university. Ideas bubble out. They generate applied research when connected to a problem. So somehow we need to look at this interface between the university, ideas, research, science, technology, and problems that they might solve. At the applied research, coming from that, we now have ideas of product design, process design in order to make the products, scale up, manufacturing, supply chain, delivery to the customer. The customer buys the product, and you have a reinforcing loop that you need more manufacturing. With customers, the more customers, the greater the impact. The greater the impact, the more customers that come to buy and use the product. The more impact, the more profit, and that is what generates economic growth. It also comes back and can reinforce funding of applied research. But it's this value cycle that allows you to create impact through research. And where do we sit in the university? Well, we're over here. But we need to realize that it's important to have an interface with the rest of the system, otherwise it's not going to work. When we impose innovation or translational research, we can expand our sphere of influence with larger amounts of innovation and moving towards product design. But we still need this connectivity with the rest of the economic cycle in order to realize impact from our research. So in a couple of closing slides, I want to come back to this concept of a goal. And this slide I use to remind us that when we think about the goal, it's very important to have it clear in your mind. So I'm standing here at about 7,000 meters, and I'm looking down at my feet. Now, there's a reason I'm looking at my feet. One reason is, at this altitude, there's very little oxygen, and it's about 5 breaths per step. So I had a lot of time on my hands, and my feet are as good to look at as anything else. But more importantly, my next step is very important. What is my goal? What is my goal as I approach the summit? Because clarity of your goal as you take the next step is pretty important. Because a misstep, the downside is not very pretty. Well, my goal is not to summit. My goal is to get back down. And it's at points like this that if bad weather were to come in, and it can come in very, very quickly, and I continue to go to the summit, then my decision to go to the summit is a death wish. Because if there's bad weather, I'm turning around. If there's an accident, I'm turning around. If someone is sick, I'm turning around and going back down. And I have experienced all of the above. So having the goal clear. So what is our goal? Why emphasize that? And I want to be absolutely clear that our goal as we sit within the university is about education and training students. It's about exploring knowledge and publication. And it's about taking that knowledge and thinking about commercialization for the benefit of society. And that commercialization goal is third. But it's part of what I believe to be our goal as responsible citizens of the modern innovation university. So if we go towards that goal and we think about the next step, and you can see a lot of concentration on the next step, there are a series of recommendations that I would make for us to think about. First of all, recommendations about education as we think about going to these new frontiers. Education in entrepreneuring. Notice I didn't say entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is something that is static. Entrepreneuring is an action term, and that's what it's about. Entrepreneuring is something that we do, and it should be integrated into our curricula. Student-led clubs and competitions are an important component of the internal ecosystem. So it's about communities. Action learning in the curricula is important. Innovation teams is an example where we bring together engineering and business school students. And I've had great success in MPP in bringing this concept here. Postdocs are an underserved minority in our community. The postdocs are terrific laborers at doing research. But they need to be educated more broadly. And faculty are do not universally understand concepts of entrepreneurship either. Building an innovation ecosystem. There are 4 principles that I think are worthy of paying attention to. Innovation should be a coalescing theme that brings a community together. Again, that was spoken to multiple times in the opening panel. Activities within the ecosystem should be collaborative and cut across what are traditional silos in the university. Investment is required to build capability and capacity. It does not happen spontaneously. There is a cost. Innovation does not violate the laws of thermodynamics, believe it or not. And innovation equates to impact. There must be a measurable outcome in order for innovation to be recognized. So to build that innovation ecosystem, it's about education broadly across the institution. It's about nurturing and sustaining multiple activities that are part of that community. It's about creating an innovation network, forming porous boundaries between the inside and the outside of the institution. And it's about managing expectations so that expectations are realistic, both in time and substance. And it's not about changing the culture of the university away from knowledge and education. It's about building on that knowledge and education and building a culture into it and around it. So in closing, when you do think about the summit, and in this particular case, we were on the summit, and there's a nice view of Everest in the background. The view was terrific. But to be reminded as you sit on the summit that you're only 25% into a journey. 75% of the accidents happen on the way down. So having clarity of the goal and keeping that goal in mind to the end of the journey. And for many of us, the journey doesn't end. It just goes on and continues in many different ways. And with that, my congratulations to the MIT Portugal program, the success that it has had. And it is like sitting on the top of a mountain and looking at a beautiful view, recognizing that there is much work to be done in order to fully realize the benefits that are being put into place. So it's with congratulations, it's with thank you for the opportunity to be part of it, and it's with best wishes as you take it forward to the real successes in the future. Thank you.